Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Graying Jedi podcast. This is the Jedi Council Chambers. I am UrzaMaster. Joining me as always, Jedi Master Psyllium Maas and Lord Uther. Welcome, gentlemen, welcome back. Once again, for the last time, in fact, we delve into the Book of Boba Fett. This episode rounds out this series thus far and offers us the climactic conclusion of both the stranger from the desert, the odd gift from the Hutts, and the Power Rangers.
They're back.
I don't want to step on any toes, but I think there were a lot of things that happened in this episode, and you could take it a bunch of different directions. But Fert Derby, give us the lowdown on the final episode of the Book of Boba Fett.
Thank you, Jedi Master UrzaMaster. Thank you, Jedi Master Lord Uther. And thanks to you Star Wars fans here and abroad and in galaxies not so far away. We have reached Chapter 7, In the Name of Honor, for the Book of Boba Fett, a show that has been alternately praised and raised online. And it certainly had its share of supporters and detractors. The last two episodes, in fact, took large swaths of their narrative and devoted it to the further adventures of Din Djarin and his foundling, Grogu. And we got to spend quite a bit of time there. And what's fascinating is it's almost like we're getting Mandalorian 2.5. Because they have a full season of Mandalorian 3 after this show comes on the air. But if you just watch the end of Season 2 and the beginning of Season 3, you might be remiss. Like, wait a minute, what are they doing back together again? Why are they all, buddy-buddy? I thought Luke Skywalker took them off to train. So the Book of Boba Fett becomes essential viewing just to get viewers to that place, as we talked about there. And those that may have given up on the show early were probably missed that joyful reunion, which does take place in Chapter 7. And we get to see R2 and Luke's iconic X-Wing, which he eventually sinks in the waters of Acto in the sequel trilogy. And I'm sure Lord Uther is loving that. But we do get to see it fly into Mos Eisley. We get everybody. I mean, this episode, we get Fennec Shan, we get Pelimoto, we get the Pikes, we get Cad Bane working with the Pikes, and I want to focus my attention because basically, friends, Jon Favreau is our writer, Robert Rodriguez is our director, as they've worked together a few times this season, and this episode is just all gas, no brakes on candy-colored speeders. And so forth. It's a shout out to King Kong, which, I mean, fairly on the nose, but also very much in the style that Robert Rodriguez has done by featuring creatures that look like Ray Harryhausen and now doing a sort of tribute to King Kong there. It's a call for Infrastructure Week because Mos Espa gets trashed, friends. There is a lot of bricks and mortar that end up on the ground by the time this thing is over. In fact, I felt bad for the set designers and production designers when they realized that Rodriguez was just going to, basically take a sledgehammer to everything that they had built there. We even have the ruins of the sanctuary where we start, that den of iniquity of gambling and adult beverages that was bombed at the end of Chapter 6. So everything gets blowed up pretty good. But what stands out for me is, again, this menace of Cad Bane. Again, working for the Pikes, who are trying to just protect their margins, as any good spice cartel would. And for those of us who watched the animated Dave Filoni, the Clone Wars series, you'll remember that Cad Bane actually took young Boba under his wing after the death of Jango, after Mace Windu beheaded him on Geonosis in Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Boba kind of fell into the bounty hunting game by hanging with Cad Bane and his crew in the animated series. So that was a mentor to him, and an ally, and for a time a friend. And obviously they went their separate ways, and we get the showdown in the streets of Mos Espa, as any classic spaghetti western ultimately could, with sort of a surprise. Cad Bane is faster than Boba. The Lee Van Cleef to his Clint Eastwood. But even that sort of standoff shootout there, to me, is not as exciting as the standoff they have in the beginning of the episode, where nobody draws a blaster, but instead you can feel the resentment, the contempt, the respect even. I mean, these are obviously paradoxical emotions, but it's all there in these two bounty hunters who have been around the block and have seen many things. And I mean, Boba, had he continued on his Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi journey and so forth, and just been in it for the payout, kind of like how we met Din Djarin initially in his series, he would be Cad Bane. They would still be the most feared bounty hunters in 12 systems. But instead, this episode proves that he has evolved, that he sees something beyond that life. And in fact, when he talks about being a daimyo, we immediately associate it with, the Godfather or some sort of crime lord or so forth. But you get the sense that he kind of sees it more as like an actual mayoral position, unlike the corrupt Ithorian who runs Mos Espa now and gets his comeuppance from Fennec Shand. You see it as someone who wants to put people to work, right? I mean, he wants his beak wet. He wants to be, get his monthly tribute. But you see a guy who wants to try to use muscle for good for everybody. Everybody wins when the money's flowing, right? Whether it's gambling or it's, the infrastructure or whatever. When everybody's earning, then everybody's earning. And so that's kind of, Boba Fett administrator. I mean, that's, it's kind of where he's evolved to. And Cad Bane sneers at him and says, "You're weak, you're soft, I'm still faster than you." And so I just thought that those two, that one-on-one, you could take it all and just funnel it down to their confrontation. I mean, that would discount, but incorrectly, these modified droidicas from the prequels that are rampaging through the streets. It would, the killer Fennec Shand infiltrating the Pike's fortress like a ninja, and just like, your brief horror beat moment as it's like, the power's out and what's going on one by one. Again, a rampaging Rancor. Now we pay off Danny Trejo training him to do it. We've got Boba riding a Rancor. And don't tell me that, I mean, we've seen it perhaps in the comic books. Don't tell me you've never dreamed that, oh wow, wouldn't it be cool if one day one of our Star Wars characters was like riding the back of one of these things? And I mean, it fulfills many a geek fantasy just to have that iconic imagery there. And Grogu. We want to talk about, I mean, his role in the end is, quite significant as a leap, seeing as though he just rejected Jedi training with Luke to become his first student in the new Jedi Order. I mean, he definitely still needs some lessons, but he can hold his own. You'll recall at the end of Mandalorian Season 1, he turned the Flame Troopers inferno back upon him to protect his friends. And here he goes to bat for the citizens of Mos Espa. And in the end, he leaves it all on the field. In fact, he probably needs a little shut-eye. But gentlemen, like I say, basically Rodriguez gives us almost 58 minutes of just action. It's just, I mean, it can almost be exhausting, but just the fact that we're getting all this stuff happening on one big canvas, the reunion between Din Djarin and Grogu, the Pikes attack, the betrayal from the other families of Mos Espa, driving those poor Gamorreans. I don't know why I feel sorry for Gamorreans, but like they're these little pig things, and they just grunt and squeak and snarl. But darned if I wasn't sad as they were like, forced off a cliff and fell to their deaths, or the one that gets eaten by the Rancor in Return of the Jedi before Luke successfully gets its head crushed. Like, I don't know why. I just have this soft spot for Gamorrean pig guards, and they deserve better than to be betrayed cruelly. Gentlemen, the main line's just 58 minutes of pure adrenaline. Let's say you Book of Boba Fett.
Well, seeing as your microphone kind of died out there towards the end, I'll just UrzaMaster, may I? Because I just wrote down a whole bunch. I just used my Sharpie to write down a whole bunch of stuff. Is R2-D2 just the bestest friend that anyone could ever have? I mean, when you think of reliable and loyal, he flies Grogu all the way back. I was kind of expecting Luke. I'm like, oh, Luke's going to team up with all of them now? Could this be it? But it's just R2-D2 being a best friend, doing something for Luke. Yeah, R2-D2 Uber driver, yes. So I just had to bring that up. It just justifies R2 being the best droid ever. Every time I hear the term spice, I think of Dune, and I'm really curious as to why they. I don't. I've also heard some conspiracy theories that Lucas was ripping off some of Dune at different points with Star Wars in a sense, which I'm sure Psyllium Maas might be able to interject on that a little bit. But why use spice if we know that's a center point of Dune? So I just find that kind of interesting.
I mean, Lucas.
Go ahead, did you want?
Yeah, he drew upon Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers, and Frank Herbert's Dune was a counterculture science fiction sensation. So I'm not saying that he outright just said, "Oh, I'm going to steal that," but it's hard to believe he couldn't have been influenced by, all of this. It's the evidence is quite clear. It must have had left some sort of impression.
Okay, yeah. So that threw that always was throwing me off a little bit. I love the point about Boba Fett because I don't think it's about the money now. I think it's about the respect. Those are two different things. As him as being in charge of Mos Espa, I think for him it's more of the idea of paying the money shows the respect versus he just wants the dough. And I think it was probably the other way around when he was a bounty hunter. He wanted the money, and then the respect was just kind of following that as being, one of the greatest bounty hunters ever. So I think that was another thing. And Lando became an administrator, so why couldn't Boba? I mean, that's possible, even though I still don't think that's in his future, but Lando did it, and if a scoundrel could do it, Boba could do it. I feel like this episode 2, or at least I'm hoping, and again, you both know I did not like Boba Fett the first time around watching it. I've completely turned, mostly because of the incredible force powers from this Jedi Council, and just watching it again gave me some clarity as well. But to me, the end battle, I just hope is a preview of what could be even better if we get this in the Ahsoka series, or if we get this in the 3 movies, where they get the whole gang together, because this is just a part of the gang. And I'm still hoping we even see Luke in that series somehow, or in those movies, however they want to do that. But that really kind of jumped at me as well. I also think Boba riding the Rancor was almost a tribute to the Christmas special, because
Yes.
he was riding the I don't even know what the name of that beast was that he was riding.
Yeah, but it was like a dragon. I mean, it was
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of a tribute to that in a sense. And this comparison just came up while Psyllium Maas was giving his wonderful opening as always. So you've got Grogu with very little training, pulling off a whole bunch of Force moves. But we also know another Jedi who had allegedly very little training and became the most powerful Jedi ever. And that's Luke. So I'm seeing a little bit of a, at least in my mind, or maybe it's my hope, because I'm still hoping Grogu becomes the actual leader of the Mandalorians and takes over Mandalore. And it's not going to be Bo-Katan or Mando. So I've been thinking about that a little bit too. Is Grogu going to wind up being one of the best ever? And finally, I just feel like this last episode too is just a great Western episode, which is what we usually get out of Mando. At least that's what was my feeling of Mando the first couple seasons. It's just this great Western. Even his music has a Westernish tone to it, even though season 3 goes on. We'll talk about season 3 of Mando at another time. But I just feel like that big battle, that big shootout at the end was just a wonderful Western thing that you would see. And Urza, I did a lot of talking, but my Sharpie did a lot of writing. So what say you, my friend?
The sacred texts! Don't throw them away!
Oh, there they go.
Hey,
Hey.
what even were they? Was it just recipes for blue milk and green milk?
Oh, God.
There's so much to say. I'll start with Grogu. I do think it's a good testament, because I saw Mando season 3 before I watched Book of Boba Fett. I think it's a good testament to where I think they're heading with the stories of the Jedi from here. In that they don't need the formal training of the Jedi Order. The new Jedi Order, I think of, it brings me right to the Ahsoka series. I think of, the cycle that they talk about, and breaking that cycle of, the Old Republic, the New Republic, the next New Republic, the same thing with the Jedi Order, the original Jedi Order, the Knights of the Old Republic, the blah, 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 blah. I really want to see the great Jedi. I want to see the Jedi who live the Ronin lifestyle. And I think you may bring up a great point of making Grogu a Mandalorian, because essentially that was his choice here: is go be a Mandalorian or become a Jedi. I don't see why you can't have both. I also think the nature of Force sensitivity is going to be seriously called into question, because I think, like with Sabine Wren, you could argue that maybe Boba, maybe Mando, maybe Bo-Katan even have some Force powers or similar style abilities, and it isn't such an exclusive thing. It may still be somewhat uncommon or even rare, but there's a reason these people come together. And I think there's a big reason why these specific individuals are falling into these places. One, because that's the way the shows are being written. And two, I think that's the Force at work, if you want to think of it in a metaphysical sense. Grogu, I think, the series got a lot of flack because Mando and Grogu kind of took it over. And I get that. And even, I just read an article today that the actor who plays Boba Fett wants to just hijack an episode of The Mandalorian because of what happened in his series. And I think that would be great. I also think that is the future for Boba Fett. Because I think what we see in this series is not Boba Fett going from somebody driven by money to somebody who's driven by respect. I think the transformation you get is Boba Fett being transformed from, a bounty hunter into a Mandalorian. He says, "You really believe in that bantha fodder of the way? Good." And I think that's him tracing his steps towards the way. Not necessarily the way of, the acolytes of Mandalore, but the Mandalorian way. The idea that this is the best for the most people. And I think Bo-Katan, in some sense, is the same. She's not just looking to retake Mandalore for herself. She's looking to, reestablish for the most people she can. And we'll see more of that, I think, in season 3, of course, of Mandalorian. But I think that's kind of a natural progression that we're seeing here with some of these characters, is they're becoming less and less self-interested and more interested in the betterment of, all of Tatooine, or all of the Outer Rim, all of Mandalore, all of, the galaxy. What greater cause is there? And that what cause do the Jedi have? They want what's best for the galaxy. Same thing with the New Republic, and starting to see all of these fibers kind of get woven together, which of course is going to lay in diametric opposite to what does Thrawn want. And that's the setup that has me so tantalized. But you see this on many levels. You see it on the local level too with our Power Ranger friends. They're now making, friends, possibly even romantic ties. I picked up on it with the people of Freetown. And I thought that was awesome, first and foremost. Not to mention the fact that you've got, droids of pre-Republic, or I should say pre-Empire, Old Republic droids basically being corrupted to be used by syndicate and or crime families. I mean, these things are out there. They're going to utilize the technologies that the Empire and or the New Republic can't trace. Just like Mando has a ship. Same exact reasons. We even see that in Andor. I mean, they've got modified ships, and this is just these cool stories that lay outside of the canon of the first 3 films that are worth telling. And no love lost to the sequel trilogy, but again, that's that cyclical thing that our good friend, the late great, possibly Gray Sith, possibly Gray Jedi, and now I forget his name. What the hell is his name?
Who are we doing?
From Ahsoka.
Yeah, Ray Stevenson. Yeah, Balin.
Yes, Ray Stevenson.
Balin.
Yes. Balin Skull.
Balin Skull.
His whole story is he's venturing beyond, the Empire or the New Empire, or the Jedi or the New Jedi, or Luke's Jedi or Rey's Jedi. Like, it doesn't matter. We're trying to break free of this same old, and tell a new story. Does this come from the dark side? Does it come from the light side? I submit that you're going to find that it's somewhere in between, and that the two sides are going to struggle. It's less of a black and white, less of a, archetypal Joseph Campbell type mythology, and more of an X-Men type storytelling, where the good, the bad, the ugly can also be the bad, the good, and the pretty. And certainly you have Sabine Wren, so anything is possible. I think we're entering an era of Star Wars, and we've talked about this in the council chambers many times. And if you haven't heard us talk of it, hit that subscribe button, jump into those archives. You will hear us talk about the future of the franchise often, and it's 100% these stories, these Boba stories, these Mando stories, these Acolyte stories, which is an upcoming series we will be talking about. And if you out there, fans, friends, foes of the Jedi Council here, subscribe to us, join us for the Acolyte, because that will be our next endeavor. And certainly we'll be talking all of the Star Wars stuff we can. But I think that's where, give credit where credit is due. As ambitious, I think, as the sequel trilogy was, the stories they're telling now are so much greater, because they're breaking this new ground. These Star Wars stories that, outside of people who read books,
What?
Nobody's telling these stories on film. And people are hungry for something that isn't a reboot or a rehash. Don't get me wrong. I think there were good things, and we'll talk about the sequel movies someday. I think there were good things that have come from those or come up during those, and certainly more stories you could dive into, and probably they should have been dove into at the time. But the Book of Boba Fett, for as maligned as it was, really, I mean, Mando did a lot of good things, but this is the series I think that really broke open all the eggs and said, look, you can make one hell of an omelet if you're willing to break with tradition. And that's exactly what Boba did, because we did not get the Boba Fett we got in the original trilogy. There's a huge break right there. We didn't get the Luke that we got in any of the movies, or any of the books, really. We got a Luke who's still kind of finding himself, which is kind of cool. I got to admit, that was probably the most exciting part, is he's still in this sort of self-doubt phase that we see in Episode 6.
I was going to say, yeah, he's really questioning himself, but borderline, to me, borderline pompous bratty when he's, talking to Grogu, like, and speaking, and we're going back to the classic issue of speaking in definites, in a sense, right? Like, it's either this or that. There's no in between. Yeah. And we know the devastation that comes from that. And he still goes that route of saying it has to be this or that. And then, well, he takes that and he leaves. So how does your academy start off? Your first student left. And your last student is going to completely
he's a handful.
Turn towards the dark side and then have a redemption arc that we've already seen before, but that's a whole nother thing. but think about that. First one left, last one.
I mean, that's just it. And that's where I think Star Wars has really, and we've talked about this too, they've really tried to redeem not just the prequels, but I think the sequel movies too, in a sense. They've tried to redeem some of the faults and failures there by weaving in, and we see this with Ahsoka, quite a bit of, what we didn't get. So that, hopefully, future tense, with the Rey movies coming up, we might see a little bit of interweaving of some of the good stuff we got here to try and elevate that product. I mean, and it makes sense, right? They just didn't have the ammunition at the time.
Yeah, and maybe it's a good thing the sequels were bad, because we're getting this. I mean, we're getting, whether you want to call it effort or great stories or whatever it is, but because it was too. It's almost like it was too. If it would have been successful, if they would have been successful, which I would argue that they weren't successful. You can look at the money and say they were successful, which I don't even know if the money was really there. Psyllium Maas would know that better than me. I think a majority of fans
they were successful. Yes,
were not happy. Well, whatever you wanted. I have different definitions of success, and that's the complete opposite of what success is. But anyway, if they would have been successful, we might not have this, because they would have been comfortable and maybe even said, let's continue telling stories about the Skywalkers, which we're going to kind of get with Rey, but I don't think we are. I think they're smarter than that now. I really think it's going to go in a different direction, right? But because it did not go well and they couldn't just be comfortable with what they had, to your point, they had to break some eggs, in a sense, and go different routes with these series. And I don't know if we would have had Mando or anything else if these things would have gone the direction they went in.
All right.
While
questioning the entire premise of your argument, which we will do when we get to the sequels, again, certainly from people who put butts in seats, which ultimately is what they were trying to do. These were very, very successful. But pushing that aside, what's interesting is
hence the problem.
Yes, all of the characters that we've seen developed recently, including Rey, Ahsoka, Ezra, Grogu, all of these the next generation of Jedi, or the guys coming in off the bench to take the lead, even Finn in the sequel trilogy, like they don't have traditional Jedi training. It could be argued that the last successful Jedi who went through training, I suppose, is Luke, and before him Obi-Wan, and that's, all of these Jedi we have now, like UrzaMaster says, Ezra's like a Ronin practically. He got stranded on a world, but he's certainly, from his teachings with Kanan Jarrus, Hera's boyfriend slash husband slash baby daddy. I mean, they didn't go to the temple. They didn't read the sacred texts. They didn't have lightsaber practice with Yoda on Coruscant. They don't even know who Yoda is in many cases. I mean, and so that's interesting, as Ursa says, that cast off some of the old ways, embrace the new. It's something Kylo Ren was telling, get rid of the old, forget it, it's dead. And so this is a very interesting juncture. I just think that this show, the Book of Boba Fett, really read to me like a 7-issue Marvel Comics episode. You had you had issues where they kind of went off on a side quest. You had issues that jumped back and forth in time and so forth. But in the end, it was a living comic book, sort of just brought to life. It imparted a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of empathy and emotion, but it was really, again, like Star Wars is always designed to do. It was designed to entertain. And I just have a hard time believing that if you have been entertained by any Star Wars storytelling in your lifetimes, going back to 1977 or, and all through the years, that you would have looked at this and said, well, there's nothing here. I think there's a lot here, depending on your level of engagement and enthusiasm. But I think that Favreau and Filoni and so forth, that chapter 6, the penultimate episode, the one right before this, where basically we had Luke and we had all of, Grogu, and we had Boba, and we had the Mandalorian. And I mean, there was just this beautiful Ahsoka. We had this beautiful thing where everybody could play in the same sandbox. And you would just feel like it was magical television. And hopefully the Mandoverse film, which is still a few years off, but being developed as we speak, or the Mandovision trilogy, who knows? Those will give us, what we're thirsty for, which is Thrawn versus the new generation. So that would be something.
I'm definitely thirsty for some more Hera. But with that, I think it's a great time to bestow our lightsaber ratings on both this episode and Book of Boba Fett as a whole. And I'm going to start with Lord Uther this time, because I think Lord Uther has had much to say. And I think this being Lord Uther's more learned run-through of Boba Fett, maybe he has had his opinion changed somewhat. So Lord Uther, take us away.
Oh yeah, my opinion has definitely changed. And I think I already used this prop. I can't use that one. I'll have to use a different one. I give it an Xbox controller green, which is also an A. The second time around, if this was the first time around, it probably would have gotten a red lightsaber. I was not happy the first time around. But as always, the view of the council and the wonderful wisdom that you've all bestowed upon me, along with my own viewing again and insight into it, has definitely taken me down a different path. And I couldn't remember. I was going to use the battery. I couldn't remember if I used it before, but I was going to say it charges me up for what could be an excellent series of bringing everyone together to go against a foe like Thrawn. So just very happy with the series overall and seeing it from a different point of view. So I'll throw it to Psyllium Maas, because UrzaMaster allegedly has a surprise just for me towards the end here. So Psyllium Maas.
Gentlemen, they say a merchandising tie-in plush toy speaks 1,000 words, so I will let this one speak for me there. I think that the Book of Boba Fett takes its lessons from the old and gives us sprinklings of the new. And so I'm going to go with a very solid green. Entertained I was. from this show, and may there be many more exciting adventures to await, including some even in Star Wars' distant past, with the upcoming Acolyte, which we will be covering in depth right here on the Graying Jedi. So be sure you tune in as we wave goodbye to Boba for now and say hello to some all-new heroes and villains in a galaxy far, far away.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that. So I think suffice to say, I enjoyed this series quite thoroughly. I'm sad I didn't watch it originally, but I'm glad in a way because I dove into it with some foreknowledge that things were going to go a certain way for Mandalorian Season 3. And now having gone back and watched it in sequence, I'm like, all right, this feels really well put together. I could see where at the time it may not have hit in the way that they wanted it to. But I'm so excited for this. I'm going to give this a rousing, and when I say rousing, I mean very rousing, Super Bowl polka green, courtesy of the Green Bay Packers. You can't beat us Packer fans. And you can't beat the Book of Boba Fett.
Oh my.
And
Nice.
for those of you pending rebrand fans out here who are looking forward to the return of the NFL season and our NFL-focused podcast, don't wait to subscribe because Cut the Cheese, Poke the Bear will be back with some 49ers flair this season. And a little foreshadowing, we're definitely going to be talking about Caleb Williams getting benched in practice after throwing 7 interceptions.
Practice? Practice? We're going to talk about practice?
So stay tuned for that. Subscribe now. But thank you, Book of Boba Fett, for everything you gave us. Rousing green lightsabers, generally speaking, all around. Until next time, when we fly back out into that galaxy far, far away, may the Force be with you. Always.